Well, hello and welcome to this episode of In the Growth Space. My name is David McGlennon and I'm your host. And I'm really grateful that you've joined me today. Our goal with the podcast here is to help our listeners to move forward with their own growth in whatever area of life that they're focused on. And some of our listeners are looking to grow their business. Perhaps they're looking to grow their business team. Some of them are looking to grow their own career or their personal financial life or their spiritual life or their leadership. And we approach growth from a number of different perspectives. And today, our guest is going to help us take a look at business growth. And our guest today is a return guest who has since written and published a book since she was on the podcast not too long ago. She was also one of the presenters on our CEO and Founders Symposium that we sponsored. And she talked about the subject of her book, which is titled Lifetime to Legacy, a new vision for multi-generational family businesses. Now, her name is Nike Anani, and she's an international award-winning entrepreneur. She's a succession specialist and a legacy planning expert for future-focused business families. She has over a decade of family enterprise expertise and recently left that family business in Nigeria, and she's the host of a top 10 podcast called The Connected Generation. She's such a delight to talk with, and you're going to love what she has to share with us today. But before we get into the episode, if you'd just do me a quick favor and scroll to the ratings part of your podcast app and give us a 5-star rating and also share a review, I'd be really grateful. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button, and I'd also love to be in touch with you in a more personal way. Every week I write an email to my community to encourage and further our collective growth as a community. And in the show notes, you'll see my website, and it's www.davidmcglennon.com. And when you scroll to the bottom of the site, you're going to see a button that you can join our email community. Just hit that button, join our email community, and I'd love to stay in touch. All right, so let's welcome Nike to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Nike. I'm so excited to have you back here. This is your second time on the podcast. I'm excited to have this second conversation with you.
Same here. Thank you for having me. Our first conversation was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I know that since that time that we first talked, you've moved your family from Nigeria over here to the United States. I'd first just like to kind of check in with you. What was that like? How was that transition?
It's wild. I look back, it's been a year and 9 days since we moved.
Wow.
And it's just amazing how much transition has happened, both for each of us individually and for us personally, collectively as a family, and then also professionally. It's been amazing. The kids are flourishing. My husband's flourishing. I'm the happiest I've ever been.
That's amazing.
It was a huge gamble.
Yeah.
Everything you've ever known. But at the time, we were just full of so much optimism and hope and faith that it would work out. And I think that mentality really helped us in pulling through when we did get to the States.
Well, and I know that you were part of a family business, a family office, and maybe this is kind of a good transition into talking about the book that you wrote, Lifetime to Legacy. What was it like to leave the family business and leave the family office and come over here and just make that transition? What was that like?
So me leaving the family business was really like a founder letting go. Because I had pioneered our family office back in 2011. I set it up. I hired the team. I put together all the strategy, the processes, the procedures. There was a lot of key lady risk, right, with me. And so letting go was my tribe. It was it was my status. But honestly, I had to kind of encourage and inspire myself towards a more compelling vision of myself and my future, and energize myself through that. That I didn't focus on what I was losing, rather I focused on what I was gaining in that season.
Oh, sure.
luckily, I had put together the governance and we were fairly well structured. So it wasn't dependent on me. So it wasn't, decisions wouldn't be made in absence of me. So
Okay.
we had great family governance, corporate governance that cascaded from the family to the company down to the management staff and things. That was very helpful, so that it
Yeah.
was very clear what my roles and responsibilities were, like on a daily
Okay.
basis, what I was doing, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis. So it
Yeah.
was very easy to say, do we need to hire someone else to fill in this gap?
Mm-hmm.
Or can we move someone else within the family office to take on the roles and responsibilities that I was fulfilling? And
Mm-hmm.
we chose the latter because obviously family enterprise, as you know,
Yeah.
it's quite a delicate space.
Yeah.
Um, to bring in someone external would take time to find talent.
Yeah.
Family enterprise expertise is very scarce wherever you are in the world.
Yeah.
Um, and then to find someone that the family would be, comfortable with also would take time. So we made a decision to just move key staff that we've built key relationships with over the years to take on my role. And yeah, so I could focus on what's next for me. How am I going
Sure.
to step into what's next, both from a mindset perspective, from a strategy perspective, from a tactics perspective. And I spent just a lot of my energy just focusing on the book, writing
Mm.
this book that had been on my heart for many years, but I just didn't have the time. So
Yeah.
finally, I had this runway of time, and I poured my energy into that. So yeah, it's been a great journey with ups and downs, nonetheless. But like I said, I
Sure.
think for me, what really helped me was what is that compelling vision of my future that keeps me
Yeah.
energized and inspired, where I don't focus on what I'm losing. I'm just so enamored and captivated by what I'm gaining.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that that's a lesson for all of us to really have that vision to propel us forward and not to look back. I know that in the book, you talk about a lot of times the older generation likes to look backwards, and then the next generation kind of likes to look forwards. And so in a lot of ways, that's really what you're doing. You're moving forward. And it sounds too like you really set up your family business to be able to do what your book says, go from lifetime to legacy and create a legacy. And so I guess maybe let's kind of dive into the book for a second, because I know that the title is Lifetime to Legacy. And I guess I'm curious then, what does that mean really? And how do family businesses really think into this idea of going from just having a business for someone's lifetime to really having a legacy business?
Yeah, no, Lifetime's legacy really is just inspired by how can founders build businesses that would outlive them and have
Mm,
sustained impact over generations, but also over space. And it was really inspired by my first-hand experience as a business owner. Like I said, I was the second gen. I'd moved from the UK, integrated into the business, and found my feet somewhat. And
mm,
also, I had consulted several families, usually the next gen. I'd start off with one-on-one coaching of the next gen, and then that evolved into deeper relationships with the family. And my observation was this whole notion of the industry really preaches and sermonizes about you must protect the future of your family business, protect
yeah,
the future, protect the future. And I just thought, well, that doesn't really make sense because the future is not guaranteed, because the
sure.
future is full of so much change and disruption, particularly
Hmm.
in this age that we're in. And these
Yeah,
disruptions can be global pandemics to political crises or
yeah,
economic changes, regulatory changes, and technological changes. And how can we ensure that as a family, we are being future focused and we are
mm,
creating an enterprise of the future? And I also observed that, like you said, quite often founders are backward looking, historical looking. How did my
hmm,
past get me to where I am today? But the
yeah,
next generation typically would be future focused. How can I grow from what can I do today to get me to where I want to be in the future?
hmm,
And the next generation would typically have their pulse on things like technology,
yeah,
digitization, innovation, sustainability. And there's this amazing opportunity to create greater collaboration within the family so they could
mm,
unlock and co-create ideas and solutions, propel them to create enterprises of the future. And that was the thesis of the book, and really through the work that I've done both in my family and also with other families, trying to band families together, creating clarity of what do we want in our family enterprise? Who are we?
Yeah.
Where are we heading? How can we get there? How can we communicate better? Not only on what is observable on the intellectual and the technical, but also on the relational and the emotional, which can be a bit uncomfortable for a lot of us. And also, how can we collaborate and really move from a paradigm of individual rulership to collective leadership?
Yeah. Well, and I was curious about you talked in the book about communication, and I think that and you were mentioning about, being able to communicate as a family. I think there are a lot of dynamics in that, because not only are you a family and you have, sometimes it's a father-son or a father-daughter or, different family relationships. So how do we bridge that gap? Like, what are some things that you've seen family businesses who have done it really well to be able to communicate that, and bridge the gap between the generations, as opposed to, pointing fingers? Well, they're, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. I think it always starts with self. I think firstly, gaining mastery and understanding of yourself. Who are you? What's your personality type? Gaining understanding of what your pain points are, your aspirations are, how you like to communicate, where your eye would naturally move towards, is really key to understanding why in certain scenarios you're triggered and you get very angry, or you get very upset, or you get very frustrated. So it starts with gaining mastery and understanding of yourself, as seeing yourself as a fully, wholly, like, emotional being, right? We are emotional beings. And then also applying the same towards your family members. So understanding that David is, I don't know, quite intuitive, and he's more futuristic than I am. And so he will always lend towards, we can create a new entity in Japan.
Yeah, right.
We can expand to Uzbekistan. And you're like, well, how in the world are we going to do that we've got a crisis to manage, employee crisis right now. You might be more here and now, you might be more past and present focused, and so on and so forth. That really helps with the communication, because then when you understand what each family member's strengths, weaknesses, focuses, struggle points, aspirations are, you're able to tailor your communication in a way that's going to resonate with them. And it's just allows for greater empathy as well. So you're not judging one another, you're really more clear towards one another.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think it takes a lot of, like you said, self-awareness and also emotional intelligence to be able to really know, why I'm getting triggered or what I'm getting triggered about, and then how to overcome that, and really just be able to have the conversation. So yeah, that's really good. One of the things that I was curious about too, and I know you addressed this a little bit in your book, but why is it so hard for founders to, let go of their business and hand it off to the next generation? Because the reality is they're going to exit the business one way or the other, right? They could die there, or they could actually hand it off and move on to, the next season of their life. So why is it so hard? What's the the force that just kind of makes it so hard?
Yeah, I think similar to the experience I went through, I have newfound empathy, and it's interesting.
Sure.
I was writing that book during the season of me leaving the family enterprise. In short, it's uncertainty over the future. It's anxiety. So Suzanne David, who is a leading psychologist, she has this term called the twixt, which is the anxiety of in-betweenness. The challenge for founders is they know they have to move on to something new, but there's a lot of uncertainty over how that will pan out. And so when you're dealing with uncertainty, you'd rather hold on to the tried and tested, what you know, rather than the novel and the new, the risky, right?
Yeah.
especially when the tried and tested is something that you sacrifice so much for. It's like that baby that you stayed up all night with when it was teething and refused to sleep and had only 30 minutes of sleep. And you were rocking that baby and you were both singing all sorts of lullabies all through the night. And no one gets that baby like you do. So you're letting go of your baby that you've carefully nurtured. You're letting go of your tribe. Quite often founders are workaholics or passionate workers who may not have may not have many passions outside of work, may not have many close relationships outside of work. Everything is kind of really related to the business somehow, like associates that they work with or boards they sit on, or so that everyone they know is associated with this world of work, and their status and identity is very wrapped up in this. So it makes it very difficult to let go of. And unlike myself, I'm young, I just turned 35. A lot of founders are, in their 60s or 70s. And it really, retirement is a signpost subconsciously for their mortality.
Sure.
It's like that life stage that gets closer to the demise. And it's not something that they're really comfortable with. Society, on the other hand, will celebrate you. Oh, great, David, he retired for 40 years building this business, and he's contributed A, B, C, D, and David's just like, good grief, like, what's next? I'm getting closer to the end of my life. I'm just dealing with all these fears and anxieties that makes it so difficult for founders to let go.
Gosh, and I hadn't really thought about it in that regard, as far as, a signpost of kind of the pending mortality. And that's a really good way to think about it, I guess. And especially if you don't have any outside hobbies or outside interests that will take you into another season of your life, and kind of moving from one season to another season, rather than just like, okay, that's it, that's the end, and now I'm just going to sit around and, play golf all day or whatever. So I think that's really interesting. Well, take it from the other spectrum then. So what's the difficulty that the next gen has? What in a family business, what's their challenge that they have, in this whole family business dynamic?
So a consequence of the older gen struggling to let go is that the next gen will struggle to grab on. Right? So they may feel like, what's the word I'm looking for, stifled. They may feel they don't really have much autonomy. They don't really have much agency. They don't really have much of a voice. And the next generation, millennials and Gen Zs, are pretty unique in that they really don't care, by and large, about income, status. They really care about contribution, connection, and belonging. And that can lead to the next generation really not being engaged in the family enterprise, whether they're working in the business or not, right? Another issue is quite often society projects onto the next generation, a life of ease, a life of entitlement. But in reality, they're grappling with the shadow of wealth, the shadow of the success of the founder. Am I good enough? Do I compare to mom and dad who built this massive business? Will I ever be able to do something that compares? Will I be able to steward this into the future? There's a lot of responsibility, especially when I don't really even understand how this whole thing works, because it's all very much led by mom and dad doing this on a very intuitive basis, rather than from a more institutional kind of orderly business. And so there's a lot of anxiety over the future. Will we be able to keep up our lifestyle when the inevitable happens? Because do we have the expertise and capabilities to take this business into the future? And then a lot of that also leads to issues around identity. Who am I? What's my meaning? What's my fit in the enterprise or in the world? Do I feel a sense of obligation that I'm obliged to work in the enterprise to keep mom and dad happy? Is that really what I can sense on my inside is my best fit in the world? How do I navigate this kind of responsibility towards the family legacy, but also honoring my truth and finding my space in the world and contributing to the world? And it's a very, it can be very challenging for next gen. Since I said I understand, because I'm a next gen, and I went through a lot of the inner work to pull through and reframe and gain clarity over who am I, what do I want in life. But I think it's definitely what I always recommend for next gens is either find a trusted advisor that can serve as a coach, find community of other next gens navigating similar questions, and you find so much solace and strength in validating that, oh, hold up, I'm not alone. I may have been lonely all this while, but I'm not alone. Other people are dealing and grappling with such questions. Others have dealt with and grappled with such questions and are thriving. Now, how can I help myself, whether one-on-one with a trusted advisor or in community with other next gens?
Yeah. Well, and I know that you said that you did some of this for you did the work, the inner work, but then you actually transitioned your family business and created a lot of processes and systems and structure, and it sounds too like that's fairly typical with a family. You've got mom and dad who are pretty intuitive, maybe not so structured, and then you come along and you kind of put together the structure. How did you personally navigate that? Were there some difficult conversations? I mean, how did that all transpire? I'm kind of curious about that.
No, great observation. So I had moved from Deloitte in London to family business in Nigeria, like chalk and cheese. Deloitte, I remember my first day, you've got a buddy or a mentor, a HR this, a HR that. I had my training calendar for like the next 18 months. Like I had full clarity. And then in the family enterprise, there was no HR, there was no finance, I had to set a lot of these things up. So I think my experience from Deloitte was helpful because I had a vision of what could be. Yeah. And so that was inspiring. But where I was getting stuck is how will I get this to work? Not in terms of what do I need to do from a technical perspective or from a competence or know-how perspective, but really how will I influence dad to see that a new way of being is a better outcome for the business and for him. So initially there was a lot of resistance, like dad, we need technology because we have 3,000 members of staff and no one can vouch or really know whether David is a true employee or not, because he's halfway across the country, in a different state, in a different town. Here in HQ, we're just approving his salary, but he may have left the business or may never have been part of the business. Dad, we need technology. And I remember initially I was a preacher, and I talk about this in the book, the distinction between being a preacher and being a teacher. So a preacher will stand there on a Sunday morning and just sermonize at you about how you're going to hell because you sin. Like we're going to hell, and like, okay, that's really inspiring as to how I can change my life. You just scare me to death. And you seem like you don't understand what it's like to be a human. Not all of us are divine. Right? But a teacher is able to know that, okay, I'm dealing with people that are not necessarily as mature in the faith. And I need to modify my lesson to make it age appropriate or maturity appropriate and speak to where they're at. So quite often when we have ideas, we have new ideas. We need to digitize. We need a new investment. We need to expand into Japan. We need to do this. We are experts of our ideas because we've been stewing on this for a while. You might not realize, like subconsciously, like what it takes for you to get to a point where you have your aha. We need to do this. And aha doesn't come overnight. And aha has been there for a while.
Yeah, you stewed on it.
You stewed on it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, as humans, when we get that aha, we want to implement it yesterday. We want to run with it and we want to see the result now. Yeah. And so we may start to preach at people. We need to digitize. We need to expand into Japan. We need to do this. We need to do that. But they're just like, what in the world are you on about? Like, preacher, like, just chill out. I check out.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so we need to amend the message to make it age and maturity appropriate and speak to where they're at. Where they're at may just be, preacher, we just need to get through this year. We've had a year where revenues went down by 30%, meaning cash in the bank. That's our priority. Or preacher, we have a huge issue with employee productivity. We need to enhance employee productivity. Or preacher, we need to up our margins. And if that's where they're at, how can we ensure that as an expert of our ideas, we're really highlighting and communicating the benefits of what you're proposing to meet them where they're at? And that was so when I had my second aha, like, okay, I think I've been preaching at this man. And he was actually very noble, and he would just, yeah. He never shut me down, but I just noticed that he'd be like, my dad would be like, send me an email on it, just send me a memo. And then I'd go like, send this memo, like, you need to do this, you need to do that. And then I noticed that, like, hold up, sir, I sent you this memo, Dad, like, where are we? How far? And he'd make up some excuse and just dance around the issue. But then when I started to speak to his key issues, his key focuses, then it's like, yeah, of course, let's do this. He then took ownership of it. Yeah, of course. Let's bring on board technology. Let's implement this biometric time and attendance system, because we're bleeding through having ghost workers in the system. Let's go ahead and do that.
Yeah. So it really seems like you had to kind of dig in and find out what was his motivation, what was his focus, and then speak to how your idea was able to solve that, right?
Exactly. It's marketing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Yeah. I was talking to a friend, she was like, aren't we all marketers? And I was like, actually, yeah, we are all marketers. But to be a good marketer, you need to understand each stakeholder. It really takes patience. That's Dad. Those are his priorities. Now, switching on the other side to the employees in trying to implement this idea, they have a whole set of other priorities, right?
Right.
They may not care about revenue at the end of the year if their compensation is not tied to it in some shape or form, right? They care about financial security. They care about status. They care about being promoted. They care about, feeling like they belong. So again, it really calls for understanding that each stakeholder has different perspectives, preferences, priorities, and each individual has different personalities. And then tweaking your ideas to speak to these Ps. But it does require kind of careful observation of each person. So you won't implement with speed, like I was speaking to. You have this idea, like, I want to go now.
Yeah.
You will have to learn the art and the virtue of patience, which I'm still working on.
I think, aren't we all, right?
Aren't we all? Like, God, like, I just have ideas. I wake up in the night, I write them down, and then when I go back to sleep, I wake up again, I'm like, I need to do this now. Yeah. Especially as an entrepreneur, I have to. Right. Everything has a process and has its time. Engaging in the process has better outcomes for the collective team. So taking the time to understand each stakeholder, what they want, and then articulating your ideas to speak to their pain points will be a better outcome for everybody.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing too is really an element of this whole thing is communication, being able to listen generously to the founding generation, to be able to understand where their focus is, where their strategy is, what's important to them. So if I'm the next gen, if I'm a next gen leader and I'm trying to influence the founding members, then I need to be able to know how my idea impacts them. And so I have to listen, I have to communicate more succinctly to that felt need. And so that's going to help move us forward. That's a really, I think that's probably true, not only just with family businesses, but just all businesses, right?
With people, even in parenting. But I think a lot of what may get in the way with a next gen being able to listen to a founder. There's the family dynamics or
Oh, yeah.
disappointments, hurts. And so there has to be a lot of inner work to heal through
Yeah.
those disappointments and hurts, or a reframing,
Yeah.
telling yourself a different story so that
Mm-hmm.
you are able to really function as a collaborative team member. Because quite often what hinders that collaboration between
Yeah.
daughter and dad, or son and dad, or daughter and mom, and is, he said this to me when I was 4. He or she neglected me for and spent all her time in the business, or she prefers this sibling, and we have to
Mm-hmm.
heal through those,
Yeah. Right. Right.
work through those. And so quite often I serve as, I'm not a licensed therapist, but really I hold space for my clients to really unpack the narratives, and the kind of underlying dynamics between themselves and their family members, and start to help them reframe those,
Yeah.
or at least work towards healing those.
Yeah. Well, and I would think that it really you almost have to have a third party to be able to unpack those family dynamics, really, because I mean, I don't know if you can do it by yourself. I mean, it would take a really healthy people to be able to do that. I think it takes a third party to be able to ask the good questions, and and see the body language, and saying, hey, well, I see that you're a little tense about this, tell me more about that, and having that third party observation, I think, would probably be really important.
For sure, for sure. I mean, I have coaches, I have mentors, I have,
Yeah.
I tell my clients all the time, like, there's no level of success where you've outgrown a third party
Yeah.
advisor, third party mentor, third party coach, third party guide. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
all are on this journey of endless mastery. And so don't feel like you are less than because you have to get third party into the room. Actually,
Yeah.
the most successful of leaders have a whole tribe of
Yeah.
people that are supporting them in navigating their
Yeah.
leadership. So yeah, that third eye, that third perspective is so important. They can see things you can't see because you're just too knee deep in to gain kind of wider perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious. In your book, you talk about something that I'd love to be able to just unpack a little bit about African businesses, and because if I'm remembering the statistic right, like only 2% of African businesses move past the first generation, and I guess so. I'm kind of curious to have you talk a little bit about like why that is, and what do we here in America and maybe even across the globe learn about that or learn from that?
Mm. No, so the 2% statistic really speaks to the maturity of a family enterprise ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Largely, historically, there's been very little awareness of the fact that family businesses are very different from your non-family businesses. They're different from
Sure.
corporates. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
about strategy and systems and innovation. Here, it's also about, like we've been talking about, it's about the soft stuff, about
Soft.
family
Yeah.
dynamics. It's about emotional intelligence. It's about communication, collaboration. It's about understanding a higher purpose, both for the
Mm-hmm.
collective family, the enterprise, and for the individuals. And so
Yeah.
Africa's kind of playing catch up in that regard, in that we
Mm.
only have one university on the entire continent of 1.4 billion people that has a
Wow.
family business center.
Wow. No kidding.
Yeah. And
Wow.
the advisory space as well. I mean, I know a handful of us that are doing the work, but it's not sufficient to
Sure.
serve the families, especially if a lot of them are SMEs and can't afford to have you one-on-one, right? For
Mm-hmm.
instance. And so a lot of it really is around the education and the
Mm.
awareness.
Mm.
Naturally, there's cultural nuances in Africa. We also have
Sure.
elder dominance, where as a young
Yeah.
person, you defer to the older person. Whatever they say is golden. That's it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And we also have high levels of communality and kinship, which
Uh,
really speaks to, we have social philosophies like Ubuntu, where We have the
Yeah.
collective humanity. I am because you are. So
Mm-hmm.
Africans have been practicing philanthropy for the longest of time. Is embedded in our social and like DNA, and even in the businesses you will see.
Yeah.
It may look different from what you will see in the West,
Mm-hmm.
but there's very much a consciousness of the wider stakeholder system and how can we ensure that we're bringing up those that are at risk of being left behind.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but really, the 2% is due to, in my opinion, lack of awareness, lack of education. But through the work myself and a few others are doing, we're seeking to change that narrative. We're
Mm-hmm.
seeking to build up the advisor landscape as well, bringing on board courses to develop like folks that already work with family businesses, like say attorneys, estate planners, human resources consultants, accountants, train them up on family dynamic succession so that they can start to take the charge in assisting families with succession planning, with family governance, and also family dynamics. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I guess maybe the last question I have for you then, how are you impacting, the family businesses, I guess not only there, but maybe even here too, because I know you're here in the US now. And so, how are you impacting those businesses and what's your mission?
My mission is to help as many families as possible move from lifetime to legacy. It's something that's I'm just deeply passionate about. I don't know where it comes from, but I'm just in love with this space. And I do that really through working one-on-one with next gens, through coaching on different elements, whether it's integrating into the family enterprise. They've walked in and they're trying to find their feet and their fit. Haha, that rhymes.
Yeah. I love it.
Or trying to make their mark on the enterprise in some shape or form, or they're trying to leave with grace and leave and find what's next for them, but in a way that still honors the family and still contributes to the family's legacy. I also work with siblings teams. I'm very passionate about, siblings teams formation and not waiting necessarily till we have to form as partners, but starting to do the work now. Because team formation, as you know, it takes a long time to band together, especially when we have to. So we don't get to choose who's part of the team.
Right.
As in a business. But we have to come together as siblings and work together, even though Victoria is very woo-woo and Samuel, on the other hand, is very concrete. We have to find a way, or we have sibling rivalry. We have to find a way to come together.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. I'm sure that that's a whole subject in and of itself, the sibling teams and navigating those dynamics, the rivalries, all of the differences in personality and so forth. And that's really amazing. Well, I think this I think this is a really important topic because there are so many founders and family businesses, but not just family businesses, but businesses that were created by a founder, and now they're getting ready to hand off to the next generation. And there's so many things that they're not probably ready for, or they haven't thought about. And so I think the work that you're doing, Nike, is so important because there's a lot of them. I mean, the baby boomers is a big generation, and not only have they started to do this transition, but it's going to be going on for a little while now. And so I think the work that you do, and this book in particular, will really help them to think differently.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So one last thing. How can people get a hold of you? Let's say they're a family business listening, they're a family business owner or a founder. They think, hey, I could really, use some help and really want to get in touch with you. How do they get in touch with you?
Please email me, na@nikeanani.com. That's NIKEANANI.com. Or you can text me, 984-900-9466. That's the best way to get a hold of me, and I'll be in touch.
Fantastic. I'll make sure that we put all of those things in the show notes as well. Nike, thank you again for being here. I think that you just have some amazing insights, and I think it's really cool to see the passion that you have to help family businesses really transition and create that legacy and talk about the things that don't ordinarily get talked about. So I'm really, really excited about this book and really the work that you're doing. So well done. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on to amplify my work. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So my pleasure. My pleasure. You know, there were a lot of great learning points in this conversation with Nike, especially if you're a family business or you're a founder and you're thinking into your transition and creating a business with a legacy that goes beyond just your lifetime. I really loved what Nike shared about what it means to have a legacy business. And it really involved being future focused and then being willing to move from being, or having a paradigm of individual rulership to collective leadership. And I think that that's a big transition for a lot of leaders of the I'm going to say the older generation, the baby boomers, because they grew up in a time when command and control was just the way business was run. And I know there are a lot of other dynamics around cultural differences as well. And Nike comes from Africa, where the male leadership is really elevated. And so moving from that paradigm of how we see leadership to being more collective and collaborative, I think that's a real dynamic in terms of making sure that if I'm a founder, I need to learn how to do that. I need to navigate that. And it does take some help. It does take some, coaching and consulting like someone like Nike. And handing off to that next generation does take letting go. But not only that, it takes a creation of a new identity. And really, there's a lot of leaders and a lot of business founders who don't know what's next. And that not knowing what's next is a really important part of sometimes holding people back. So I just want to encourage you that if you're in that era and if you're looking at handing off to the next generation, make sure that you explore who you want to be before it's time to hand off. And then, quite frankly, on the other side of the spectrum, the next generation has a hard time with taking over, as Nike shared, because they're still trying to figure out their meaning and identity within the family business and just gaining clarity around who they are and their role. And learning to speak to the older generation. And I think learning to speak to the motivation of that senior leader who needs to hand off was something that was really important that Nike shared. And I thought that was a really important point. The other part that she shared, and I don't want to skip over this, but if you're a next generation leader and you're in a family business, she shared about how she did a lot of inner work and that healing and just letting go and learning to tell yourself a different story about whatever the situation is in your world and in your life and in your history. But the other component really is taking time to understand each of the stakeholders as you learn to take over from that next generation. So I hope you enjoyed this episode and got a lot from it. Go check out Niki's book called Lifetime to Legacy. And coming up in the next couple of episodes, we're going to have some conversations with people who were part of our emerging leader inner circle and who are part of our advancing leader inner circle groups. And I just wanted to have these conversations with a couple of those leaders because it's really cool to watch and listen to people who have gone through their own growth journey of leadership and really who are advancing in their own leadership journey. So make sure that you hit subscribe. You don't want to miss these next episodes, I know for sure. Finally, make sure that you keep looking forward, keep growing, and until next time, be well.